to know. We haven't been studying them long enough to really get a good sense of how long these animals can live. And of course, there are so many threats to them, well, it's hard for them to reach their full potential anyway. As you can see by this picture, they're quite large. This is an aerial shot from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. Most of the adults tend to be in the 50-foot range. They range anywhere from 45 to 55 feet. And the calves, oh, so cute. They're only like the size of a minivan, 15 feet or so, 20 feet. So the habitat for these guys is very specific. Unfortunately, they're not circumglobal, and they certainly are not nearly as widespread as they once were. I think they'd never find each other if that was the case, because there's so few of them. They occupy the east coast of US and Canada, and there are some other rare sightings in places like the Gulf of Mexico or off the coast of Greenland. But most of their time is spent close to shore, near bays and peninsulas and shallow coastal waters. So what do they look like? They have a tubby body. Yeah. Going back to the kids' models here. They have a pretty tubby body with a large arch to the mouth, and I'm sure that's hard for you to see, but see how there's like a big smile up here? There's a really large arch to their face because they are baleen whales, which means they're filter feeders, and so they have a lot of baleen that hangs down to help them filter their food. On the face, there's crusty protrusions, as you can see here. These are called callosities, and it's a dermatological condition that contains cyamids because it's such a rough, crusty surface. And the cyamids are basically, they're a little bit like a spider or a crustacean of some kind. They have jointed limbs and they're small, like a little parasite, and they occupy the spaces in this crusty skin. Kind of like if you were a crusty cat from the back alley, you might have some mites on your skin. That's sort of what they do, but they're not so bad for the whale. The cyamids are white, so it makes this callosity shape on each whale appear white. And for each individual, what we see with that is an individual pattern. Much like our face as humans, you can see one animal from another because of what they look like. And yes, I'm calling humans animals. Or like a fingerprint. You know, you have, each one of us has an individual fingerprint, and we can make a database for that. Well, we do the same for these right whales. And fortunately for our research purposes, but unfortunately for the whales, there's so few of them that we're actually able to keep track of them based on the patterns on their faces. So let's see, what else is different about the right whale? Well, they have no dorsal fin, so that's an important thing to note. You think of dolphins and whales, and usually they have a fin on their back, so there's none of that. And also they have a V-shaped spout. Instead of their blow going right up into the sky, it sort of V's out and has sort of a low, bushy effect. And also their flukes, or their tails, are dark and smooth. So you don't see any kind of a nice pattern like you might on, say, a humpback whale. So this gives you a way to be able to look at them. Aerial photographs, as you can see by the photos here, are the easiest way to see the pattern from the sky, but you can do it from boats as well. The right whale feeding that I mentioned is quite particular, and I wanted to put up these pictures so that you'll be able to get a sense of how they look and what they do. Now, right whales are very hard to see from the water, and I'm going to go into how that's a little bit a part of their problem, although it's really cool and unique how they feed. It's not exactly the easiest to examine and be able to tell from afar. So needless to say, I'll just say that it's interesting. Right whales, as you can see by these pictures, are not big, fancy, floppy whales that jump out of the water just for their feeding. They swim very slowly with their mouths just slightly open, skim feeding exclusively on the surface of the water. That's where their food is. The pictures at the top here that you see are, they're plankton. I'm sure you'll recognize this even if you're an adult from SpongeBob SquarePants. Plankton, the zooplankton. That is exactly what they eat. They're not fish eaters. They filter their food, and they filter very small amounts of food. They prefer small invertebrates, most notably Calanus finmarchicus, which you'll see in the square picture in the middle, a microscopic photograph of that. And because they're specialized filter feeders, they can get lots of food at a time. They eat as much as 2 tons of plankton, or 1.6 billion individuals per day. So as you can see, there's a scale on my slide that says 1 millimeter, and they're just a little bit larger than that. Ocean currents and water temperatures are going to determine where the right whales feed. And so they go looking for these big patches of plankton that they can find, and then they skim through them. As I said, they have a really large arch to their mouth, and that helps contain the giant plates of baleen that are going to hang down. I don't know how much familiarity everyone in the audience has with plankton, but it's different than teeth. These whales don't have teeth at all. They have plates. So I did show this in a previous webinar, a plate of baleen from a humpback whale. Now this is fairly small. I'll back off a little so you can see. The plate is about 18 inches long. There's 2 individual plates, and I can slightly separate them so you get a sense that there's 2 plates here. And what they do is they hang down from the jaw and extend from the whale's jaw, and they create almost like a horseshoe-shaped pattern going across the mouth, the top of the mouth. And they hang down and fit together like the bars of a jail cell in a vertical pattern. At the ends of them, there are these bushy protrusions. They're a little bit like how straw would feel if you had an old-fashioned broom, and they go all the way up the side on one end. So the outside is going to be a little bit smoother, facing away from the whale, and the inside is going to be a little bit more with these hairy protrusions here. And I say hairy because they look it, but they actually are made of a protein. The protein is keratin, which is the same protein as our hair and our fingernails. So if you can touch your fingernail, you'll get a sense of what it feels like to have baleen in your mouth. Now, I didn't bring any right whale baleen because that can be up to 8 or 9 feet tall. The hairy protrusions that I was talking about are so fine and delicate that they can catch these individual pieces of plankton, and that's why they slowly skim through the water so they can catch it like a net, or like when you use dusters on shelves and it attracts all the little tiny pieces of dust. Sort of does the same thing. For comparison, I'll show you a much smaller whale, a minke whale. This came off of about a 22-foot specimen. This is, I'll hold it real close so you can see the individual plates. Can you see the individual plates? There's maybe about 20 or so squished together here. This is the outside where it's smoother, okay, of the keratin base. And towards the inside, now just let me remind you, this is only a couple plates. In the whole animal's mouth, you're going to see hundreds of these. On the inside, it's a little bit fuzzier. Can you see that and get a sense of what it's like when they want to catch their food when they're filtering? The animals get caught in this piece, and they can squirt the water out of their mouth and skim that out, but then the animals stay inside and they can scrape it off with their tongue. So the way that right whales do this with the microscopic plankton, they skim and skim and skim, and that means that they maintain a really low profile in the water, which is further exacerbated by the fact that they don't have a dorsal fin, so it makes them a little bit harder to see. So the interesting thing about whales and about right whales in general is that they're part of biodiversity. They are part of the ocean. They're part of an ecosystem that creates the most amazing diversity. And the ocean contains so much life, and the whales are at the top of the food chain. As I said before, 1.6 billion individuals consumed by one individual whale per day if it's feeding. That's an important biomass for them to focus on. And so that kind of health that we need to focus on, that we need to understand contributes to the environment, that kind of health of the wildlife population means that the ecosystems are going to thrive if they're balanced. If they don't, then our biodiversity is going to go down. And you'll learn a lot more about biodiversity from other lectures. I'm here to tell you much more about the right whale, so I'll do that. Whales, they're at the top of the food chain, and they have an important role in the health of the environment. Unfortunately, their large size and important role, they don't protect them very well. 7 out of the 13 large whales, which those 13, they have the baleen in them, are classified as endangered or vulnerable, even after decades of protection. So there are many threats to whales that affect biodiversity. There's habitat displacement. People move into an area and there's a lot going on there. There's marine debris like trash and ghost gear. There's physical and chemical pollution, active entanglement in fishing gear, which is now the biggest concern for this small population of right whales. The New England Aquarium in Boston reports that 83% of this population has entanglement interaction based on scars, and many of them have been entangled more than once. And that's how they're getting their reputations, is how they're entangled, unfortunately. 2 animals have been entangled as many as 7 times. That's pretty sad. Maybe they aren't learning their lesson. We also know that the more time passes, the more that the injuries become more severe. And now we see that we're seeing more entanglement because there are changes in fishing distribution, and rope is increasing in strength so that fishermen don't have to spend as much money or put out as much equipment so often. And there are likely many more whales dying from entanglement than are documented. And those events occur all over the eastern seaboard and wherever fixed fishing gear occurs all throughout the world for any of these marine mammal species. But we're doing something to focus on all of those problems. Today's webinar topic focuses on vessel strikes, and they were previously proven to be one of the greatest threats to the right whale population, and a significant one to other types as well. Between the years of 1986 and 2005, according to a study done by the very famous right whale biologist Scott Krause, 19 of 50 reported right whales that died were killed by vessel collisions. So that's a serious issue. Vessel strikes have received a lot of attention, and although there is still room for improvement, a lot has been reduced because of effective regulations. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. So why are right whales in trouble? Well, the first answer is history. They're in trouble because they didn't have the best start. Originally, the population was, we're guessing, about 10,000 that existed in the North Atlantic waters at the start of whaling. I'm sure all of you have heard of whaling practices before. It's not highly practiced anymore, certainly not in our region where only indigenous people are allowed small quotas. But Vikings and the Basques from coastal Spain were the first to hunt right whales along the shore. Basques later sailed after their prey, and then the Dutch, French, British, all those whalers hunted them into the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries. And they were hunted here in America also. I'm sure if you know anything about history, you can see that it's rich with examples from that. Especially in my region, we hear about it, in the regions of New Bedford and Nantucket, Massachusetts, where there was a very thriving fishing and whaling community there. So the commercial hunt for right whales ended pretty much around 1970, when there were hardly any left. The official whaling ending was about 1935. But at that time, the population was decimated from what we guessed was approximately 10,000 animals down to maybe 100. And I know our estimates are a little bit more scientific, a little bit more modern now, but potentially 100 animals, not very good. Our current estimate is somewhere in the 500 range, and we think that that's pretty accurate. So what else puts animals in danger? Well, we're starting with about 500 whales. That in itself is what makes the right whale, the North Atlantic right whale, that is, critically endangered. The whole species is on the brink of extinction. Imagine if there were only 500 people in the world left. Would you want to repopulate with them? Well, even if you wanted to, it wouldn't be very easy. The loss of just one female that might put a handful of calves, or right whale babies, into the population over its lifetime is a major threat to their growth and recovery. And we know that severe or fatal injury due to ship strikes decreases the North Atlantic right whale ability to reproduce, or at least it removes one from the population. So not only can you lose one, but you also have the potential for future ones being put into the population to help increase it. You're putting that at risk. We have a really great shot at being able to help these guys if we can stop or reduce vessel strikes. And we have done that. But there is an additional challenge. With more than 200,000 photographs dating back to 1935, when the initial whaling ban happened in America, the North Atlantic right whale photo identification catalog, which is managed, again, I'm mentioning New England Aquarium in Boston, very famous place, is the most complete right whale identification resource available to researchers today. It helps to study the whale's behavior, genetics, population structure, all those things that help us define, what's going on with the population and what we might be able to do to manage the resource. It's increasing our understanding of individual histories and family relationships. We're getting a sense of making sort of a family chart. The life history and the behavior, we're getting a sense of why they're so at risk. In simple terms, the characteristics of right whales makes them more vulnerable to being struck by any kind of a boat in the water, large or small, than pretty much any other marine mammal species. Those characteristics have been identified by a number of studies that have come out through New England Aquarium and other groups based on their identity. Remember, I mentioned the callosity pattern. We can note these and study them very hard and figure out who the individuals are. On feeding patterns, I already showed you pictures and we discussed baleen. The mating behavior, migration and distribution, which we'll talk a little bit about. Genetics, they can take samples from the individuals and code the genetics out. Acoustics, that's the sounds that they make. And mortality, which unfortunately is the study of their death and how they're dying. Those are the ones that are most likely to get hit. And here's why. The studies reveal that they're feeding with the patterns that they feed. It's kind of in a zigzag pattern, and I'll show you, with the whale. It can sometimes be in a lawnmower pattern where they do go in one direction and then they quickly turn and go in another. So almost like a lawnmower. Or sometimes it's like a zigzag pattern where they're doing this. And the problem with that is that it's difficult to observe them when they are encountered in the first place. Take a look at this photograph right here, produced by one of my colleagues at Whale and Dolphin Conservation. The profile is so low in the water, you almost wouldn't know that they were there. It's not like they're splashing around while they're eating. They're just sort of chilling out. So they're hard to see. But the zigzag feeding makes it so that they're also unpredictable in their surface behavior. So if you try to even get away from them, you might hit them anyway. The shape of their body, they're difficult to monitor by sight. That's another issue. Where they maintain such a low profile and have no dorsal fin, they're going to be kind of hard to see. The senses, they have no known capability for echolocation like some of the dolphins do. So it's not easy for them to react if they finally get a sense that there's a boat in the area. And also their energy output. There's such a high investment in their calving. They begin reproducing at age 10, and the females are pregnant for 12 months. And then the calves are born in the winter, between December and March, and they have to nurse the babies that they just carried for 12 months more. So that's, in and of itself, is a 2-year commitment. So there's such an investment in that, and then it takes 2 to 5 years to produce other offspring, because they have to regain that fat back, and they might have a tough season of eating, that it takes a really long time to make more whales. So it's not like they exactly have the easy path to get going here. So why are they so special to us? Well, the right whales, they visit all over the eastern seaboard of North America. As you can see here, this is a depiction of the eastern seaboard of America. And what you're seeing is the feeding grounds, the migratory corridor, and the calving and nursing grounds. This is the migration route up and down the coast that these animals take. But what do you notice about the distribution of the whales? This basic map from NOAA shows the right whale habitat and their migratory corridor. That's the path that it takes them from getting to from the feeding grounds to the mating grounds and vice versa. And it's very strictly adhered to the coastline. So the North Atlantic right whale is known as the urban whale because its migration between these spots that it needs to get to carry out its life take place within 50 miles of the coast, hugging the shore, sometimes even closer to 20. So Why is that a problem? Well, how does a whale get in the way of the boat? It gets in the way of the boat because they take up the same space in the same time, the same area of boat traffic. The places that we're looking at range from the Bay of Fundy to the Scotian Shelf, Cape Cod Bay. You can see the little hook about 3/4 of the way up there at the very edge of the feeding and mating grounds, and all the way down to the Florida coasts. So they have to travel a long way, and it's a tough journey. It really is. Here's why. This is, and my apologies for it being a little bit on the fuzzy side, but I had to blow it up to show you a little bit, is from the Office of Protected Resources from NOAA. It shows the traffic routes in the mid-Atlantic region in a period of about 1 month. So I want you to take a look at that and just let that settle in. This is just the traffic route of ships. Take a look. Now think again. It doesn't seem like a big deal to have whales hanging out near the shore, right? Well, all the easier to view them. How adorable. The problem is that their migratory routes cross all the major East Coast shipping lanes. And as I said, this is a problem with other whales here and in other areas. It's just that the right whales seem to be the most at risk. So they need to swim through these high densities of fishing and shipping activity in order to conduct their own whaley business. Now, remember how I said these guys are slow swimmers and they're hard to see from a boat because of their body shape and their low profile? It's even more difficult to play dodgem with a whale when there are so many boats this close to shore, and all the ports and bays and peninsulas and all those other little bodies of water are full of boats. They need to dock and conduct their shipping and fishing business and whatever they need to do. Just one piece of information I learned from the Whale and Dolphin Conservation. They say that it takes one fully loaded super tanker, of which there are many in the water, over 14 minutes and about 2 miles to come to a crash stop. That's if they really pull the brake. Now, realistically, that stop would take closer to 20 minutes. Doesn't that seem incredible? It's a huge structure. If you're a right whale feeding in the water, you're not gonna have time to get out of the way, for sure. And even if those ships do see a whale, they're so large they can't necessarily stop or even adjust their course, unfortunately, in time to avoid the whales. So that's a lot of traffic to weave through. It's challenging for the whale, and it's definitely challenging for the captain. Here is another depiction, like we just saw, showing the Northeast. This is where I live, Cape Cod, Massachusetts. And again, this is just a depiction of 1 month's worth of time of ship traffic. Now tell me what you think. Along this crowded coastline, who has the right of way? Whales or ships? Let's see what your answers are. Well, it's a loaded question, isn't it? And it's a double-edged sword, because we've got to carry on our business, and the whales have to carry on their lives. So sometimes the right whales survive, and sometimes they don't. And as I said before, many marine mammal species are affected by vessel strikes, and that's unfortunate. Here you see on the upper left-hand corner, fin whales. That one is strung right over the bow of a ship that didn't even have any idea that it was there until it got into port and people mentioned that they saw this whale hung right over the bulb of the bow of their boat. On the lower right-hand corner is a smaller whale, a minke whale, that had some hemorrhagic issues and stranded on the shore, and it was seen to be through a necropsy that had been struck by a vessel. And on the lower left-hand and the upper right-hand corners, you'll see a depiction of a couple humpback whales from Cape Cod area. The one on the lower left, actually the mother and the daughter, the mother and the calf, I'm not sure if it's a daughter, I misspoke, excuse me, were both struck by propellers from a boat. And you can see with the arrows that I have placed on here that those scars have healed in, and you can actually see the whorls from the propellers on the animal. Same with the one in the upper right-hand corner. That is a whale named Pleats, a young whale, and it was basically plowed into by a propeller. And I'm sure that nobody knows they're doing this or wants to do this, and it's very hard to avoid the whales. The reason why I'm showing you these pictures is so that you can get a sense of what some of that damage looks like, either when the whale comes to shore, drifts ashore because it's dead, or when they survive, they're still in the water and they do bear some scars. Now, one human interest story I really like to share is about this whale here. This helped to inspire reversing some of the ship strike problems and to get people involved in learning a little bit more about them. This whale, and it's the one not with the giant tail hanging closest to the top of the screen, but in the middle there with the sort of U-shaped jawline, is named Raina. And she was only about 15 years old when she died. A ship propeller sliced off her left fluke, and the unfortunate part of that, even more so than the loss of that individual, was that she was pregnant near term, about 10 months, with her own calf. And if you look really close, where the sort of blaring lights are in the upper left-hand corner, behind the rib cage of this animal, you can see the full structure of a calf, almost to term, that is fully articulated, and that is the calf of this animal, oriented just as it would be if she were alive. So this is on display as a stark reminder of the tragedy of vessel strikes at the New Bedford Whaling Museum, which is in New Bedford, Massachusetts. When a whale is accidentally killed, researchers and scientists try to make the most out of the information that they gather when these animals die. They conduct a necropsy, also known as an animal autopsy. And if a skeleton like Raina's is intact somewhat, they can usually reassemble it or re-articulate it, but the joints, they move together, and put it on display for educational purposes. So there are a number of whale skeletons all around the United States that have been put together of many different species to help us study the animals better. We learn a little bit more about their morphometrics. That's the measurements taken on the animal. And we also learn, just like CSI, we learn about why the animal was injured or how it was killed. I've been to conferences where they've seen a cracking in the skull after doing a necropsy, and that shows them that the animal suffered a trauma to the head, and that was likely the cause of death. Something like that makes a lot of sense. So you have this big problem, so what do? Well, the U.S. government has the National Marine Fisheries Service, which is inside NOAA, the branch that's dedicated to protecting and preserving the nation's living marine resources. And that can be through research, it's through fisheries management, it's through enforcement, you've heard of environmental officers, and of course habitat conservation, making protected areas and forests, national forests, things like that. They have highly specialized non-government organizations also to help with this mission. And some of the things that have been done, in short, are laws set in place to help with these animals. Laws, where to watch for the whales, and what areas they hang in the most. Slowing down the boats, that's vessel speed reduction rules. There are certain places that mariners have been asked to divert their course to avoid the whales, either voluntarily or mandatory. There's, of course, tools of education, much like I give you now, or through handouts, things like that. And, of course, there's also technology. So let's look at a couple of those in a little bit more detail. Right whales, as I said, are special to us on Cape Cod. And what we have done to help them here is to create, in about the last 10 years, we have figured out all kinds of maps of where the right whales hang out, and at what times of year they hang out. And they just love to come to Cape Cod. This year alone, we had 253 of them recorded to be inside our little bay. If you see the yellow part in this map here, that's inside Cape Cod Bay. And over our wintering season, we saw more than half of the population here with us. So with the knowledge in their whereabouts, researchers and lawmakers have developed seasonal management areas, or SMAs, and that's what you're looking at in this map right here. These are areas where there are special rules in place at the times that the whales visit. Not all the time, just when we have a guesstimate of where and when the whales are. They've also developed a concept called dynamic management area, or DMA, so that if anyone reports a right whale outside the SMA, that voluntary measures can go into effect that will protect them. And that might include, a diversion of course, or, just a note to mariners to keep an eye out. It might mean, slowing down their boat or whatnot. They're all very specific. And that's where we get into things like mandatory regulations, which is coming up here. This is a little bit of a mind blow, so I won't go into every part into detail, but publications are widely available that help mariners and educators alike to comply with the law. And as you can see here, NOAA Fisheries Service is the one that put this one out. This is very important. It should be on every boat over 65 feet, and people should know about it. Some of the laws that help with right whales, as well as some of the others, are the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which has been with us since 1972. The Endangered Species Act, of course, right whales are, and there's only 500 of them left. They're critically endangered. That's been in effect since 1973, and we have worked on a right whale protection program with very specific measures inside as a result of the Endangered Species Act. Also, there is a rule specific to right whales called the 500-yard rule, in which you can't get any closer to the whales than that, and if you do, you're breaking the law, even if you don't know that it's a right whale. So you're always urged to try and figure out what the whale is, and if you don't know, stay as far away from it as you can so that you're not going to risk injuring it. There's also the mandatory ship reporting system, MSRS, and that is if you see a right whale, you must report it to the proper authorities, including the Coast Guard, so that they know and can put a notice to other mariners out. More recently is the ship strike rule, which includes the seasonal management areas, as I mentioned before. You see the maps here and where those are. They have mandatory speed restrictions inside them. If your boat is over 65 feet, you must slow to speeds of 10 knots or less in those SMAs. There are also voluntary speed reductions in temporary designated DMAs, as I mentioned before, the dynamic management areas. And I do want to say that there are some gaps in these laws. They're hard to get put into place, and when they are, they're only for certain times. And to have everybody know about them and comply with them, it's just so hard. On top of which, it doesn't cover all boats. It covers the boats that are over 65 feet, and it excludes sovereign vessels, which, as we know, are vessels of the government, so like Coast Guard and things like that. The ship safety concerns are already addressed in the current ruling. The exemptions, they're allowed to exceed the speed limit if safety of operations is compromised. So there's all sorts of caveats within this rule. But as far as we can see, with these regulations in place at this time, enforced by NOAA as a United States agency, we can see that 80 to 90% of what would be a ship strike against a whale has been effective. What I mean by that is that per the studies that have been done with these rules in place, we've had a reduction of ship strikes by 80 to 90%. And so it's a very, very effective ruling, and that's why we need to keep it in place, and if we can, improve it. Another really fantastic and somewhat easy method of helping these whales is a TSS, or traffic separation scheme, and that's really, really easy. Because we've seen patterns where the North Atlantic right whales are more dense, we can actually start to move our boats out of the way to reduce the chance that they might get struck. You can slow down all you want if you're where the whales are. But if you have a chart like this that shows you where the density of the whales are, you see how there's all kinds of little white dots in there? That shows where the majority of the whales are at a certain time of year. And so the pattern year to year is somewhat similar, and it's important to be watching it at each year and to have a sense of where the whales are. But we know that if there's a pattern of how dense the whales are, we can shift where our boats are going. And so we've actually learned to shift the shipping lanes, and it only has to be a small amount to reduce the number of strikes that we see. Moving a major shipping lane is not a quick job. We need the densities on, the whale data. We need to be able to print all kinds of maps and graphs and send these out to people. The offshore shipping lanes are the responsibility of the International Maritime Organization, and they've moved shipping lanes in other areas for the sake of whales, but it requires a lot of robust scientific data. So that means that we really need to be watching. We need to have legitimate organizations doing that and be able to produce data like this in a pictorial format that we can show people and say, this is why we need to move things. In other areas, ships have slowed down to reduce collisions to whales, but avoiding them really is the best method, and we've been able to do that. Plus, I think mariners who work on the water are going to prefer a small diversion of slowing down their boats because they can get to where they need to be going faster without having to take longer to do it. The Boston TSS that you see here, what we're looking at is Boston Harbor area and Cape Cod Bay. This was so successful, used about 10 years ago and continued to this day, that it was used as a model of success for the coast of California around the Santa Barbara region, where they have some issues with with gray whales being struck, as well as a number of others. So to better scientific understanding, lots of technology is used. And I'm going to kind of pass through this because I know we started a little late and we're getting short in time. But I just want to tell you about a few really cool things. Tagging and collecting samples. This might be the most exciting and dangerous work that you can do with right whales, but it's so important. This picture is a depiction of the New England Aquarium's right whale research team, and they are world class. Their program is the longest running and most comprehensive North Atlantic right whale research and conservation initiative in the whole entire world. Of course, don't forget, they're right here where the whales are, so that makes a lot of sense, right? They're in the middle of their annual research right now. They go on a trip to the Bay of Fundy and the Roseway Basin. And so far this year, there have been more sightings, many more sightings than last year. And so they're doing really well. Alongside them, the Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary, one of our 13 marine sanctuaries in the United States, works very hard to get data on right whales. One of the things that they have spent a long time coming with getting their tagging data out is they've worked on something called the DTAG, or the Digital Acoustic Recording Tag. And in humpbacks, this has been a landmark piece of technology that's helped people to learn about recording whale depth and direction and pitch and roll and sounds created and received by the whales and all sorts of things. That data has given us a chance to recognize particular whale feeding patterns, including in the humpback whale, for example, bottom feeding and spiral nets where they go up to the surface, and double loops and all sorts of different things that they do. And so tagging a whale to know where it's going and to see what it's doing is really important. Sometimes that's in the form of a DTAG, sometimes in the form of a satellite tag, and in some cases even video camera tagging. Has anyone heard of the critter cam? That's something that definitely is used. So another piece of technology is the Right Whale Listening Network, the RWLN. And that's a really cool thing that comes to us from the lab of Cornell University in New York. And what that gives is a network of passive acoustic monitoring. They're fixed buoys that have a sound collector on them, basically. It's a sound device that we have in Massachusetts Bay. And that picks up right whale calls, and it lets us know where they are. So we can get a sense of that and send a notice to mariners, and also to be able to record the data and save it for later. The Right Whale Listening Network has really helped us, in particular, with a fantastic app. This app is called Whale Alert, and you can find it absolutely anywhere on any smartphone. You can get the app for free, and it's a great piece of technology to spread awareness of the risk management, the risks that they face, like I'm doing for you today, and also warning management right in the water. If the whales are endangered and you want to find a way to stay away from them or not hit them, or at least be around them safely, you can go to this and see what your current location is, as well as some of the areas that are to be avoided. And so I've listed some of those things right here. And the final thing that I like to talk about, and it's probably one of the most important aspects of doing this work, is public education. Here we are today in a webinar, so you can learn a little bit more about that. Some of the most important pieces I have listed here. One of them includes the North Atlantic Right Whale Consortium, which happens every year at the same place. I was telling you about Raina, the whale that was shipstruck and had the baby in her belly. That's in the New Bedford Whaling Museum. It happens every November, and I go to it alongside the organization that I work for, Whale and Dolphin Conservation. As part of their group, we go and we learn from other scientists and collaborators, come together and learn more about whales and do what we can to save them, get updated basically. There are whale watch workshops. I go to one every year in April. It's just called Whale Watch Naturalist Workshop, and it's on the very tip of Cape Cod in Provincetown. It's run by the Center for Coastal Studies, and they teach marine biologists and naturalists how to behave properly around the whales alongside the captains and how to work with them safely. You can learn things from boater safety courses given by the Power Squadron, by the Coast Guard Auxiliary. Of course, we have all kinds of chart publications, and every mariner, recreational or commercial, needs to have those to know where they're going. Our coastlines are very intricate. And also, in your own town, there's parades and all sorts of events that you can go to. On the lower left-hand corner, we had a celebration of the right whale and all the successes in last year. So we made a cake, and that is a depiction of a right whale on that cake. My very favorite teaching tool is this right here. Her name is Delilah, and she's a giant North Atlantic right whale model. You can actually walk right inside. There's a door that you can lift up, and you can use a blowing machine to blow her up. This is a whale that was made by a high school group that shows real-life measurements of a real-life whale. So you can walk around inside it and get a sense of what it's like to be inside the body of a whale. I had the opportunity to use Delilah as a model many times at festivals, at trainings with other marine biologists, and also in school group gatherings. Here, it was at the Mitchell School, obviously. You can see it pretty easily. But that's just another nice tool to have. So despite all the things that we've done and all the tools we have, there are still some weaknesses that we have to cover with this right whale strike issue, the vessel strike issue. As I mentioned before, there are some weaknesses with the ship strike rule that are being challenged, and it only addresses certain portions. It's a little bit too detailed for this webinar, but what I can tell you is that we do need better scientific data. We do need better education for all, especially for the public. We need to be sure that we can have more marine habitats that are protected for these animals. And, we're not there yet. Necropsies and scar studies have shown that right whales are still having interactions with vessel strikes. And although they are reduced, it's not a small problem. It's a big problem. Because if we lose just one animal, we could potentially lose the whole species. And that is a big problem to biodiversity, as well as to our personal love for our whales. In New England here, we just love those right whales. Over the past 5 years, I have devoted my personal and professional time to understanding innovative solutions for the issue of ship strike reduction for large whales. And I have especially focused on the right whale because they're so iconic. I've looked into everything I could to increase public awareness, networking with NGOs and attending meetings and forums, and analyzing data available through shared databases. And these are all things that you can even find online on Facebook, on websites. You can write blogs for social media venues. There's all sorts of stuff to look at. I just wanted to put this picture in because it's really beautiful, a tiny brand new whale. Now, I gave you a summary of what the right whales are doing and what their problems are that they're facing. We talked about how they're critically endangered in some of the forms of management, and there really is, there's a lot there. The study I have done has focused on conservation measures along the eastern seaboard with regard to vessel strikes and the North Atlantic right whale. But this can be applied as a framework for any whale or any large marine mammal or any animal at all in the world that's in the ocean. And so that's the hope that I'm hoping to give, is that you'll be able to be inspired to learn a little bit more about that and to talk a little bit more about that. So I've listed a few things here. What are some of the things that you can do to learn more and to get the word out? I am getting a couple of questions, and since we only have another minute or so, I will be happy to take them. Let's see. Wondering if there is a difference between a gray whale and a right whale. And yes, absolutely there is. I can give you the basics if you want to know just about what they look like. As far as distribution goes, there are more gray whales in the world than there are right whales, and we don't see the gray whales on this coast. The gray whales are on the west coast. They're a little bit different. They feed a little bit differently, but they are filter feeders, the gray whales are. And they extend, all the way on the western coast from the north to the south into Baja and out of U.S. waters and into Mexican ones. And they have really knobby, scratched faces. They're absolutely beautiful, but they have a lot of markings on them, I think more so than the right whales do. They're also more streamlined. Let's see, what else am I getting here? What can you say about the increased stress of vessel traffic contributing to the risk of vessel strikes for right whales or any other whale species? Well, that's what this webinar is about. There's a lot of vessels traffic, more so than ever before. And I think the biggest concern is that our population as humans are growing. And so that means our population needs more. We need more commercial stuff. We need things to be carried all throughout the world. We need shipping. We need recreation, so we have more boats in the water. And so because of that, that increases not only the danger to whales in terms of vessel strikes, getting hit by a boat, but it also increases their chance of being tangled in the fishing gear that might leave behind. And it gives us another problem. There's a noise. Just the fact that those boats make a lot of noise in the water, and it can be confusing. It's very difficult for them to maintain communication when they have that. So although it contributes to right whales having a hard time recovering their numbers, it contributes to any whale species. And so we really have to be careful how we manage that. I hope that somewhat answers the question. And then I guess the last question I'll take is, can you tell us why you like whales so much? And to refine that, why did I pick whales over all the other animals? Well, I gotta tell you, folks, I didn't pick whales over the other animals. Whales picked me. I fell into it because I live in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and I see that this is a problem here, and I'm a problem solver. I don't like to stand by and watch things happen. I like to do something about them. And what I see is that this is a big problem in the area, and that fortunately, because it's such a big problem, and because I love the ocean so much and spending time by it, and I think that the whales are beautiful, for their aesthetic purposes. I also understand through my learning that environmentally they're really important too. And if we lose them forever. And I just want to say that the right whales in particular are an excellent example of what we can do to help recover a species and apply that knowledge to other animals and other habitats. And so that's why I picked whales. Very specifically, if you want to know more, a really lovely international group called Whale and Dolphin Conservation, of which I have made many notes through my last 2 webinars. Their North American office is based in Plymouth, Massachusetts. And although I was doing a lot of veterinary biology work and rescue through other organizations, it was really Whale and Dolphin Conservation. I interned for them and then just never left. That gave me the true passion to my life. And so I will definitely, no matter how little money I make or how far or short I get, I'm going to be sticking with working in this field because I think this field needs a strong voice, and it needs some young minds to connect with some of the more old school ones, and it needs to have connections that that are spread far and wide. I think we need collaboration, and so my long answer to your short question is that's why I picked whales. Do I have any more questions from anyone? Okay, well, with that, what I'm going to say is thank you so much to the teachers and the students of Elgin High School for making it possible for me to reach a wide audience and to be able to use this video later to teach about environmental topics that matter. Like I said, biodiversity and this issue of the right whales. Also, many thanks goes out to the organizations. You see their logos listed here. There are many, many more than this. These are just the ones in my area. And so I want to be sure that if you live anywhere in the United States, you can certainly look into these ones, but please do check them out. Go on Facebook and learn about others. You might be able to have something right down the street if you're passionate about, you can work towards. If you want to learn more, visit any of the listed websites that do great work all over Mass and all over the United States. You can also pose me a question on the lower right-hand corner. There's my picture with a whale, and you can check it out on Twitter or Facebook. My Twitter is @OceanDevotion84. I'll be happy to answer your questions or connect you with an appropriate colleague or organization who can answer your questions. And that's really about it. So thanks, everyone, and happy National Biodiversity Teach-In Week. I appreciate being here and hope to see you soon. Take care. Signing off now.